seen her side. She left the town long time ago. Where she has been, really, I don't know. In town, and it's back in town. It's coming back in town.
In De Rerum Natura, Lucretius wrote of Sicily, this wondrous isle, rich in splendid beauties, admired by all the world, envied for its opulence, and rich in noble spirits. Our adventure begins like this, with curiosity that leads us to discover places unknown to most people. We crossed the historic bridge of Capodarso, built in the 16th century using Sabucina stone at the behest of the Emperor Charles V. Below us flows the river Salso, which the Greeks called Himera Meridionalis. It divides Sicily in two and is the region's longest river. This watercourse was subsequently exploited by the Arabs, who organized the island's territorial administration by dividing it into three districts: the Val di Mazzara in the west, the Val di Noto in the southeast, and the Val d'Emone in the northeast, where the Salso formed the border between the western and eastern parts. Heading north, we come to the castle of Resuttano. It is strategically placed on the main road travellers would have been compelled to take between Palermo and Catania, connecting the Madonie mountain range with inland Sicily. The building was most likely the work of the Arabs, since the place name derives from Rahal Subtanum, meaning a fortified farmhouse. The structure of the castle suggests it had a strategic function. It is a single fortified tower with no sign of any additional structures or living quarters, so that it could be inhabited permanently. The tower, similar in type to those erected to defend the coast, was built out of unshaped stones, except for the outer corners, which are reinforced by large, regularly shaped blocks. The structure consists of two levels. The lower level has two small rooms. The room on the north side is vaulted and only accessible through the ceiling. This was probably the cistern of the tower. The other room on the south side has two windows and a door. For defensive purposes, the main entrance is set in the east wall of the upper level and was probably accessed by a makeshift flight of steps. The remains of a spiral staircase in dressed stone gave access to the upper part of the tower, which is now ruined. The castle had a succession of owners and a checkered history. During the 11th century, it was occupied by the Normans, who captured Sicily from the Saracens. It later became the property of the Ventimiglia dynasty, who were the counts of Geraci and Collesano. In 1600, Giuseppe di Napoli, one of the most powerful nobles in Palermo during the period of Spanish rule, was given the title of Prince of Resuttano, and in 1625 he built the town which took its name from the old castle. The natural world around us is stirred by the wind, which seems to whisper to keep going because there is still so much on this island to see. So we decide to head for Canalotto. village is striking testimony to the Byzantine period, one of the most important in Sicily's history, lasting from 535 to 827 AD, the year when the Arabs landed at Marsala. The settlement is located about 6 kilometers west of the small town of Cala Civetta in the province of Enna, in a valley inhabited since the ancient Bronze Age, overlooking the Morello River. The valley has at least 40 cliff dwellings with rooms attached to them, including 4 oratories laid out on a basilica plan with a single nave, 2 of them with pitched roofs. In addition to crosses and other Christian symbols carved into the rocks, Canalotto has a typical pagan necropolis. The explanation for this seems to be that the site was occupied in 2 different periods, the earlier one being the necropolis dating from Roman times, and the later one a settlement by Christian groups. The walls around us are made up of sandstone, full of the fossils of seashells, evidence that the area in the Pliocene was completely submerged by the sea. The rooms above these 2 places of worship have burial niches for holding funerary urns, dating from Roman times. The Romans called such a place a columbarium because they looked like the buildings where doves were raised for food. During the Middle Ages, they were called spezierie, meaning places for storing spice jars. In addition to the structures reserved for religious activities, several chambers were used for productive activities, including presses for wine or olive oil, which would be stored in interconnecting tanks where the liquid was decanted, and mills. This type of settlement is typical of the system called cenobitism, a form of monastic life in which the monks all shared the same living spaces and worked and prayed together. The valley around us is served by paths, flights of steps, water pipes and numerous tanks to collect rainwater as well as springs, which feed a system of aqueducts consisting of tunnels and shafts called qanats in Arabic, all carved out of the rock. The whole complex was defended by fortified walls, and this has led scholars to identify the site with His al-Jiran, a place mentioned in the Arabic sources which means the fortress of the caverns. The site of Canalotto is not only of historical and archaeological importance, but offers spectacular views of rare beauty. A place of peace and silence that still conveys a profound sense of spirituality which for centuries accompanied the people who chose to live there. With our eyes filled with images of a past so remote from our own way of living and thinking, we continue our journey to another place, equally ancient and rich in history. car and keep going on foot along the ancient network of roads that date back to Roman times and were called Regitraziere in the Norman period. After walking for some minutes, we can see the necropolis of Realmese. With more than 290 tombs, this is one of the most fascinating necropolises in Sicily. It was carved into the steep slopes of Cozzo San Giuseppe, probably the site of the settlement about 3 kilometers from Calascibetta. The area was formerly crossed by streams flowing from both north and south. Their waters, once abundant, have left their traces in the lush vegetation that we find today. The tombs are carved into the rock with a markedly oven-shaped form, closely resembling the typical Sicilian ovens, though some have flat roofs. The pattern of settlement at Realmese is similar to the coeval network of numerous indigenous Sicilian sites. Beginning roughly in the 13th century BC, for the defense of the territory, they were concentrated in the safest areas, often on cliff tops, naturally defended by steep slopes and with walls to protect the more accessible sides, while in earlier periods they would be scattered in small clusters that took advantage of local landforms, being grouped on the plain, in the hills or in the mountains. Diodorus Siculus, a historian who lived in Agirion in the 1st century BC, wrote about the Sicani, the name used by Greek historians for the inhabitants of south-central Sicily. He stated that the Sicani formerly lived in villages and built their towns on the strongest heights for fear of plunderers. It is difficult to leave these places after exploring them. They are a leap back in time into cultures that are dormant yet so rich and vivid that we feel overwhelmed. We feel curiously regenerated in spirit with a subtle melancholy for those places which still have so much to tell us. We leave Realmese and set off once more making for Riparo San Tommaso. Riparo contains a record of human presence and activities in a place repeatedly chosen for settlement through 50 centuries because of its physical and strategic location. The narrow and fertile valley of the Torcicoda River, which rises on the slopes of modern town Enna, continues for about 15 kilometers until it joins the southern Himera River. In its middle section, the river flows through a deep channel in the sandstone substrate, carved out by the action of the water, which has created a veritable canyon, about 2 kilometers long, 80 meters wide, and up to 60 meters deep in several sections. In the final part of the gorge, there are 3 large shelters carved out of the rock, 2 set on the western side and 1, the largest, on the eastern. Archaeological excavations still in progress have already shown that the site has been inhabited since prehistoric times. In fact, there are numerous caves that were used both as shelters and places of worship. Guy de Maupassant, in his diary Journey to Sicily, wrote, "Sicily is a land of oranges, of flowery fields, with its air fragrant in springtime." But what makes it a land that just has to be seen and quite unique in the world is the fact that from end to end it can be described as a strange and divine museum of architecture. A large forecourt welcomes the visitor. The Abbey of Santo Spirito in Caltanissetta rises proudly with its austere lines, an invitation and admonition to enter with head bowed silently and respectfully. The Abbey of Santo Spirito was founded following the Norman conquest of Sicily in 1061, headed by Roger the Norman. In 1072, Pope Urban II gave him the title of Apostolic Legate. Roger undertook to restore Christianity to Sicily, which had been occupied by the Arabs since 827. He built new Christian churches and restored the dioceses linked to the papacy in Rome. A plaque set in the left-hand pillar of the principal apse of the abbey records its consecration on 14th of June 1153. The church was actually built on an earlier Arab farmhouse, and there still remains a turret with loopholes for military use, which later became the bell tower. The church consists of a nave 20.40 meters long from the sacristy and 8.80 meters wide. At the east end, it has 3 apses divided by pilasters. The interior is restrained and austere, just like the exterior, and conveys the same powerful sense of peace and spirituality. Upon entering, we find ourselves before the statue of Our Lady of Grace, a terracotta polychrome work dating from the 16th century and the oldest Marian statue in Caltanissetta. In addition to its antiquity and technical merits, the statue is interesting for its symbolism. The Virgin's bare breast is the principal attribute of her motherhood that distinguishes this statue from most representations of the Madonna, which are usually more austere. On the wall opposite the altar is the baptismal font, fashioned from a single block of sandstone. Its decoration of stylized palm trees carved in relief are in Arab style. The presence of Arabic artistic elements shows that numerous Muslim artists and craftsmen remained in Sicily following the Norman conquest. Above the font there is the crucifix of Staglio dating from the 15th century. It was produced in the Hispano-Flemish style of painting under the influence of Aragonese culture at the time when Alfonso of Aragon ruled Sicily. The figure of Christ on the cross has under his feet a skull that symbolizes the remains of Adam, who according to tradition was buried on Mount Golgotha. Above the altar is a fresco of Christ set among the clouds, with one hand raised in blessing and an almost intimidating expression recalling the similar mosaic in the Cathedral of Monreale. In his left hand, he holds an open Gospel on whose pages we read the words Ego sum lux mundi, qui sequitur me non ambulat in tenebris. Painted in the Baroque period over the remains of a much earlier fresco, it was repainted in 1974 by Archimede Cirinà of Catania. On the left wall of the church is a magnificent funerary urn dating from the 1st century AD. Made of marble, it is carved with the figures of rams, falcons, and vegetable decorations. An inscription shows the urn belonged to a certain Diadumenus and can be dated to between 70 and 81 AD. It appears that Diadumenus was a freedman of the Emperor Vespasian, and this shows that the site was inhabited as early as Roman times. The 15th century fresco of Christ Blessing was originally set in a lunette over the entrance. After restoration in 1971, it was placed inside the church. The painting's symbolism is typical of medieval art and reminds us of the depiction of the same subject in the more famous apses of Cefalù and Monreale. All the elements of the painting are very heavily outlined. Christ's right hand is raised in blessing, while his left holds the book of the Scriptures.